this video is instructions for a couple of assignments, the ethnography analysis assignment and then the final ethnography project. So at this point you've already learned about the first few components of this overall set of ethnography activities, including the assignment based on an interview, which was a podcast, the assignment based on observations, which was the photo essay, and now I'm going to talk about the final two pieces of it, that is the ethnography analysis and the final ethnography project. So let's go ahead and go over those handouts. So we're going to go to assignments. I'm going to go down here to ethnography analysis. This is an assignment that is due March 6th. It is based on your previous work doing interviews and observations. As you know, in those previous two assignments, you're asked to do 3 interviews and 3 episodes of observation, right? 3 rounds of observation. So for this, you're now going to bring all that material together and identify some of the key themes that have emerged from across all 6 of those items, the 3 interviews and the 3 observations, okay? So I give you some instructions here about how to go about doing that. You're going to start by listening again to your 3 interviews and looking again at what you sort of took down as part of your observation. That should include field notes and the photos you took. And you're going to look across all 6 of those items, or listen and look across those 6 items, and look for anything that repeats, right? Are there any topics that come up more than once? For example, did more than one of the people that you interviewed say the same or a similar thing? Or, for example, when you did your observations, did you see something similar in 2 of the different places you interviewed, or 2 of the different places you observed, or on 2 of the different occasions that you observed, right? Another thing to look for, is there anything that seems especially important or meaningful from your interviews and observations? So, for example, if you observed something, right, you were watching and you observed something that seemed to encapsulate a key point that one of your or more than one of your interviewees made, okay? So in other words, what you're looking for is patterns, things that repeat, or meaningful moments, right? Things that seem significant. So those are the 2 kinds of things that I'm hoping that you'll be able to identify, patterns and meaningful moments, all right? So the next step, once you've identified those, you've gone through all your stuff, you've identified those patterns and moments. Now, for this assignment, what I want you to do is make a list. Make a list of those repeating and or meaningful things that you've identified from across all your interviews and observations. Those are what we're calling your themes, okay? You may have a lot, you may have not that many. What I want you to settle on for this assignment is the most significant 3 themes from your list, okay? So what you're going to actually turn in for this assignment is that list with some more information and explanation, okay? So what does that mean? You're going to state each theme, you're going to explain it, right? What's the theme, what's its significance, and you're going to indicate what your interviewees said, and or what you specifically observed that led you to the theme. So in other words, what we're starting to do here is identify points of analysis, those are the themes, and connecting it directly to evidence. That's specific stuff from your interviews and observations, all right? So what your write-up that you'll submit for this assignment will look like is basically, 3 chunks of text. 1 for each of your themes that explains the theme, and then also provides the evidence from the interviews and the observations that back that theme up. So that's what you're going to do for this ethnography analysis assignment. So let's now go to the other assignment, which is the final ethnography project. And this one is really sort of the culmination of all these smaller ethnographic assignments that you've been working on. So if you look at this handout for the final ethnography project, you'll see that it goes through many of the steps you've already taken, right? So you remember we did that assignment called choosing your subject, right? So there's that step. Data collection, that's the 3 interviews and 3 observations that you've done. And then analysis is the assignment that we just talked about, right? The ethnography analysis, which is where you're going to look at those materials you've collected and identify your 3 most important themes, right? So the final step, which is the main sort of focus of this handout, is writing. So having done all of those previous steps, you're going to write up a 5-page paper that is due at the end of the term. So it's due on March 13th. So right when this half semester term is ending, okay? So I give you on this handout really specific instructions on what that paper should look like, how it should be organized, and what should be in it, all right? So you're going to write, again, a 5-page paper, minimum 5 pages, and it's going to be organized into the sections that I list here. This does not mean that you're going to turn in 5 separate papers. This is one paper, but the way that your paper should be organized is that it is segmented into sections, each of which has its own subheading, okay? So for each of these parts of your paper, you're going to put a little title on it so that it breaks up your overall paper into these different sections that do different things, right? So those sections are, first, you're going to start with an introduction. In the introduction, you're going to give an overview of what your paper is about. That's including sort of a description of what you studied and a thesis statement. What did you learn? What's the most important thing you learned across all of the research that you did? The second section is going to be your methodology, where you're going to give a brief list of who you interviewed and what or where you observed. Okay, methods are those research activities you engaged in, so the methodology section is going to be where you're going to talk about that, all right? Then, the third section is called analysis. This is the most important part of the paper. This is really where all the most important stuff happens. In the analysis section, you're going to write up what you figured out in the ethnography analysis assignment, that previous assignment, right? So remember, we just talked about the analysis assignment in which you're going to find 3 main themes and how those themes are connected to specific evidence in the interviews and observations. Those 3 themes and the evidence connected to them are what you are going to write about in the analysis section, okay? So, as I say here, what this part of the paper, the analysis part, can be a revised version of what you submitted for the ethnography analysis assignment, all right? So you're going to go back to that assignment and you're going to make sure that you've edited it and make sure it makes sense in the context of the bigger paper, and you're going to put it into this part. The fourth section of your final paper is going to be a conclusion section. This should be a follow-up on whatever your thesis statement was. What was the main thing you learned? You want to return to that main point here in the conclusion, all right? If you can extend your main idea in the conclusion, that's even better, right? So you can do things like think about all the main themes and points that you presented in your paper, and think about how do those points relate to each other? Is there a bigger point you can make, a broader conclusion you can come to? That can be what's written up in this conclusions section. Finally, at the end of the paper, after the actual text of the paper, you're going to have what's called an appendix. An appendix is like an add-on, right? So the add-on is going to be a detailed discussion of your research, or list really, of your research activities, okay? So I already mentioned that in the methodology section, you're going to give a very brief list of who you interviewed and what or where you observed. In this appendix, I want more detail. So again, it can be a bulleted list, but I want to know more about what kind of research activities you engaged in, right? So for each interview and each observation, give me the basic info of who, where, when, for how long, and what was the main subject, okay? You do not need to tell me the real names of the people that you interviewed, or for that matter, the real names of the places that you went. You can protect people's anonymity, that's fine. So it's not that I need to know people's identities, it's just that I need to know sort of who it was, what kind of an interview you did, etc., okay? So you're going to write a 5-page paper. The appendix is not part of the 5 pages, okay? What an appendix is in any paper is an extra section, essentially. So your 5-page paper is going to cover from the introduction to the conclusions, all right? For many of you, you will write a paper that is longer than 5 pages. That is perfectly fine. If you have good stuff to say, if you have interesting things to talk about, please don't worry about being over 5 pages, all right? If you write your paper up and it's less than 5 pages, or you feel like you need to stretch it somehow, then you've done something wrong and you need to return to the earlier steps in the process, all right? It should definitely be simply no problem at all to have at least 5 pages of stuff to write about, given that you've already done all these different things, you've done all this analysis. It should be pretty easy to write up, okay? And then I give you some information about how they'll be evaluated. So this handout, again, is sort of your guide. But again, remember that you are, over the course of this term, working through the first parts of the assignment. So really, what you'll need this assignment handout for is when you get to that writing stage, which will be a little bit closer to the end of the term, in time to wrap this up for when the term ends in mid-March. So I look forward to seeing more about this. Of course, as always, if you have questions, please let me know. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.